What's up, everybody, and welcome to a Thursday edition of Morning Cup of Hockey presented by Bet365. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. So use our code NATION, NATION, in all caps. That's Colby Cohen. I'm Johnny Lazarus, and we have a great show for you today. We got a new friend of mine in Brant Berglund and a new friend of the show. I met Brant during the Winter Classic in Chicago, and I am just fixing my mic, which is not working, I guess. It's not plugged in, so give me a second. I met Brant in Chicago at the Winter Classic, and Brant walked us through the NHL Edge and tracking data presentation, which is what the NHL is using, every day on a day-to-day basis, every game. If you saw the Seattle Kraken video the other day, as my microphone gets plugged in there, hopefully that's better. I apologize for that. But let me just walk you through Brant's background a little bit here. He was the Boston Bruins video coach from 2002 to 2010, so just missed that Stanley Cup window with Colby, but he's done a lot of incredible stuff since. He's built out programs that coaches use on the bench with the iPads. Every app that you see coaches use for video, Brant has necessarily built out the data for that. He does a lot of video analysis and uses so many different tools. And I'm explaining this poorly now because my microphone threw me off, obviously, because nothing goes smoothly when I do it. But we're very excited to have him on. It's going to be a teaching kind of episode. So I know a lot of you have questions about stats and data that we talk about on the show a lot. Colby and I break down clips all the time here, but this is a different angle of that. So without further ado, I think we just want to bring Brant on right away. So welcome to the show, Brant Berglund. Brant, how's it going? Sorry for the intro there. My microphone kind of threw me off a little bit. I don't know if I did you enough justice. And you're muted.
We gotta get your audio up and
you're
running
muted
there,
Brant. So we're off to a poor start here today. But
hey, I one-upped you. I was muted off. That was the easy one. I mean, 5 years of Zoom sessions, I might have had this figured out by now. Sorry.
Look,
I'll improve. I'll warm up quick here. Sorry.
We're very excited to have you here today because your background is so different than what we normally have. We have a lot of former players. We've had GMs, we've had coaches, but I think the visual aspect of data and advanced analytics now, which is something that I've railed on this show, and you and I have even talked about now, Brant, because I think that there's so much data out there for people to use, and they like to use it in lieu of what your eyes tell you. And I always say, like, it has to be a piece of the pie, but it can't be the whole thing on how you evaluate players. So having you come on today, the guy who literally created all these different data services, basically, that coaches are using, teams are using. There's iPads on the bench. Everybody sees that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was a program I believe you piloted, correct?
Yeah. So my time after the Bruins, I went to a software company where we built the first sort of streaming DVR app that was deployed to the benches with the NHL. And it's still out there today, along with a couple others. The other one is one of the others is the SAP Coaching Insights app, which is more data driven. You've got a tool to be able to look at every face off from the game by dot, matchup wise, zone wise. It's a pretty remarkable tool, and it's got to be user friendly enough that a coach can pick it up, get information off of it quickly, and put it back down because it's the bench. I mean, that's the thing. Unless you know what it's like to be out there, you can't imagine. The fact that sometimes less usage of the iPad, but more effective use of the iPad is better. And Apple's been great with that. SAP's been great with that. All of our partners have. So yeah, it's been neat to work on both those projects.
And something that we didn't really, or that I didn't mention, I guess, in the intro too, is that, you did grow up around Northeastern and BU's men's hockey programs, which obviously Colby can relate to, being a BU guy. You guys just missed each other, it seems like, in all your paths of hockey. So I'm sure you have a lot of people in common, but you've also, worked with some of the top coaches that we've seen in the NHL, Mike Sullivan being one of them. I know you've worked really closely with him throughout the years, so I'm sure you have a lot of cool stories with him. But the people in hockey and everything you've done in hockey, you said, sometimes it's a little bit of luck, but the path you've created for yourself is so unique. And I don't know if you want to start from the beginning, but I think we definitely would love to hear a little bit more of your background and the early days of how you got into this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to keep it related to technology since it's sort of why I'm here.
Yeah.
I finished playing prep school hockey on a really good team, and I was not good enough to really take a chance and play college hockey. I ended up going to BU and working with the hockey team there. Did everything. I loaded the bus. I helped Mike DeMello. We'll give him a shout out on the equipment
Love
staff.
Dima.
And
Love
you know,
a good Mike DeMello shout out.
I did whatever. And Larry Venice, I mean, they were like my college parents. God, did they have their work cut out for them back then? But anyway, I had this really unique opportunity. I was going to film school actually at BU, and we bought an editing system. And Jack Parker looked at me and said, "You're going to take this and run with it." And after I graduated, and halfway through that year, I got hired by the Boston Bruins, which was, I mean, we were at the Clarion and up in Utica, New York, out at Lina playing Cornell. And then like 3 days later, I was at the Ritz-Carlton in Atlanta. Boy, this is quite the change. Nothing wrong with Utica, but that was quite the change. And I got baptism by fire. I had a coach that was in a tough spot, Robbie Fatorik, who honestly, like looking back on what he taught and the things he focused on, was just way ahead of his time. And one of the assistant coaches on that team was Jim Hughes. So Jim Hughes and I are cutting up, and Wayne Cashman, I get to work with some of the greatest people. It's the gift. It's the greatest gift this job has given me, just being around some of these brilliant people. And we worked on VHS. We had a really crude editing software that might have been a little bit of a step back from what I had at BU, to be honest, at that point. And I mean, video coaches at that point, not every team traveled with a video coach.
Right.
You know, and when I traveled to go on road trips, I had 5 bags and they were VHS tapes.
Wow. And what like, was it widely accepted to be doing video at that point? Like, what kind of pushback and what kind of relationship did you have with coaches in those early days, whether it was Jack, even though I know you were doing a lot of different things? Because listen, especially back then, he was the iron-fisted ruler. You know, he got softer in the OOs and into when I got there, and then you go up to Boston, like, these are hard-nosed people you're talking about, good people, but hard-nosed people.
Yeah, Jack and Mike Davis. I mean, like I said, Larry and Mike were my college parents, but I mean, I there was no room. The maturity that it took for me to actually grow up there and do this job for them was huge. But Jack was open to any idea. You know, we would have a VHS tape of every breakout from UMass Amherst that year.
Yeah.
Them. And he used them. You know, he was so open to ideas and technology, as was Mike Davis. And they were huge in allowing me to kind of get the wheels spinning in my head on how to do these things right. But you mentioned Mike Sullivan, and that was probably a pretty good segue for Boston, because he was another guy, and still is, that is open to every piece of innovation he can find. If it's going to help them win games, he's in. And you know, Harry Sinden, who is an amazing person, and he was not a fan of video or laptops. I remember sitting in the hallway in a preseason AHL game with all the laptops for the coaches set up the first year, and he just walked by me and he was shaking his head at me. and you have to accept that. If you want to, you're not always going to get people to buy in if you're trying to push change. And Mike Sullivan was the one who like put the gas down on, no, we're all in on this. Every coach needs a laptop. Every coach needs video. Everybody's got to work here. We're gonna take this to the next level. And he was a huge factor in me advancing my career.
I'm really curious what the first like tactical adaptation of your career was when it comes to video, and then like implementing that into, let's say, a team system, right? Like something they do in like a forecheck or a neutral zone setup. Like, what was the first thing that you picked up on that then led to an actual on ice change?
The year the Bruins won the President's Trophy, Joe Thornton, Glenn Murray, it was a year or two before Patrice Bergeron. They lost to Montreal in the first round, Game 7 at home. And Claude Julien was a coach of that team, who I would later work for. Mike Sullivan came in and after that series and completely broke down the box and one defense, because Montreal used it so well. He also looked at a left wing lock system, which we didn't end up using. But like having, again, this is the gift. I got to watch him break this down and work through this material in front of me before he presented it to the players. And I think that's something that he's really done over the course of his career, where every coach needs to learn. There's things you need to know. There's things your players need to know. They are not the same. And his ability to now filter and like get down to the crux of things while educating himself with those deep dives, that was the greatest. And you think about what that box and one defense and how that became such a cornerstone of the Bruins system for years to come after that. And that was all based off of video and going back and like looking at Montreal, the way they did it and the way they took Joe Thornton's eyes away that series. Joe Thornton always wanted to find Buzz in front of the net. Well, Montreal wasn't exactly hard on defense, but they made him face the wall and they pinned him, and that pass didn't happen. And, you know, Mike was very aware of that and he adapted to it. It was awesome.
So do you think when you put together a lot of these, I mean, obviously we're going way back, like you've done, and we'll get to the middle of it.
We're holding on to you for an hour here today, probably.
Yeah, like I hear you're talking about some of these things, like you got to sit there and watch Mike Sullivan break these things down. And like, I still think Sully got a raw deal his first time around in Boston. Like Boston, I mean, obviously Claude came in and did a pretty good job, won a Stanley Cup, like had a lot of really good years, Claude's a great coach, but hard pressed to find a guy more well-respected than Mike Sullivan. Right. And so do you feel like some of his coaching DNA kind of got implanted in you and comes out when you're putting these things together, when you're doing like the edge visual work and the tilt and all of these programs you've worked on? Like, is that DNA come through all that stuff?
Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about subjective stuff a little bit, probably more later on, but I was tasked by different coaching staffs to break down different things. Sometimes I would help break down the opponent. Sometimes I would really help break down the scoring chances. And with certain staffs I did. And that was hard because I would have arguments in my head between the coaches on what was a chance and who was responsible at 2:00 in the morning. And I watched the same things over and over and over again. You know, that's after an 18-hour day at the rink. And yeah, those things stay with you. And you could still hear those arguments when I watch this stuff now. I mean, you know, I try to talk to young video coaches and talk to them about, you know, find your time to speak. That took me a while, as you can probably tell. I'm not afraid to talk. But like the gifts outside of the hockey world, like the outside of the playing surface, how to manage coaches, how coaches manage each other. I mean, watching different assistants with different relationships interact with different head coaches. It's probably a whole podcast in and of itself. And I'm not quite sure how much I can say about it, but like, it's just it's all in my head. I mean, Craig Ramsey is still one of the most innovative people I've ever worked with. There's so many that I worked with that could fit into that category. Claude was one of the best people at managing people and setting expectations. And he was so fair, but firm at the same time. He's just clear. But with Rammer, it was like, you know, he had one phrase: there's no 100%ers. And that's hockey. And he would watch video and he would have no emotion. He would just be like, yeah, that worked. And he's basically saying, yeah, that time that worked. Maybe another time it doesn't. You know, we have to teach players to use their brains more as hockey players. And that stuck with me all along.
Well, it's funny that you say that though, because I think it was last year on this show maybe where I was like, if I were a player, I don't know if I'd like the iPad on the bench thing, just because, you know, when you're younger, you're taught like, don't think about the last shift, focus on the next shift and worry about video in between periods, right? Like you want to see, you know, what their breakout is or what their PK setup is. Like you'll worry about that in between periods and don't think about what just happened, you know, focus on the next, like, but you know, with you and your career and how helpful it's been to the game now, like obviously you'd feel against my opinion, right? Like, you know,
well, and Johnny, I'm going to push back on you too, because sometimes when you're sitting on a bench, you go down and you make a play, or you try to make a play on a breakout, and in your mind you saw it a certain way, and then you come back to the bench and you can look at an iPad and you can actually see, you know what, I had two better options here, because look, from the overhead or from the game camera, you know, camera one, it does look easier and more spacious out there. I say this all the time, like, go between the benches like I do in my broadcasting career, and then you realize just how good these guys actually are. That's why I don't subscribe to anyone in the NHL as an actual bad player. I hate that, because it doesn't exist. But I love being able to, in real time, look at the iPad and realize I had two better options on a play, which is where I think guys, when something doesn't go right, that's when they go to the iPad. That's when they look to see what their better options could be. And Brant, maybe that's what it was intended to be for. You could maybe give us and you created a lot of these things. So like, what was your thought, how these iPads would be deployed on benches?
You guys, I started about 14 sentences in my head based off of everything said, and I'm going to try to find all of them. First off, I've been fortunate enough to kind of lead some of this stuff, but just create it as like, I can't lay code. I've learned a lot about it because I'm a nut and I have to dive in on things, but like I've been involved with a lot of this stuff, just to clarify and make sure I spread out the love. The bad players thing. Sean Thornton used to have the best responses to that. Right? He scored a backhand toe drag out of the corner.
I remember that.
I remember that goal.
Filthy. Yeah. And of course, the media asked him afterwards, my gosh, Thorny, that was an amazing goal. He's like, yeah, I play in the NHL.
I remember that. I remember when Thorny did that.
He did that all the time. Phil Kessel got in the bus one time and was like, Thorny, that was a sick move. And Thorny's like, yeah, I'm a sick player, but I play in the NHL. And he was not hearing anything to do with being a fourth liner. And look at Rempe's goal last night.
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking that too.
A couple games ago. Like the guy's much maligned for his ability. He still plays in the NHL. There's no room. You can't be a bad player in the NHL anymore. It's 100% accurate. iPads on the bench. I love the idea of adapting in between periods. Even before we had DVR capability, I had one monitor next to my head that was on a 15-second delay that I basically had a DVR on, and I paused it so I could always look up and kind of give that instant feedback. That's always gone on. You got the eye in the sky who's helping coaches process. Players will ask coaches on headsets. That's always been there. What you're doing is you're making it more efficient. Mike Sullivan at a users conference we held one year. It was the day before he got the cup, by the way, to talk about Mike Sullivan as a person. The year they won the cup, the day before he had his family day with the cup, he came into Boston and spoke at a users conference with all of our users. And I mean, that's the kind of person Mike is. Like, he wanted to represent everything they did. And that was the year that you saw Kessel, Malkin, and Crosby first using the iPads on the bench in the playoffs. Remarkable stuff. And debatable, always open for debate. But one of the video coaches in the room asked that question. Don't you think this is just a distraction and that players should focus on the game? And Sully just deadpanned. He goes, if it was a distraction, it wouldn't be on my bench. And honestly, what has happened is teams have made rules about it. I think people recognize the value of it. I think there's certain rules you hear, like only during stoppages, which is a pretty smart one, considering the safety factor of pucks flying into the bench. I think there's other rules where if a coach is on it, the players can't see it. These are all things I've kind of heard indirectly from coaches over the years. I think like anything else, there's moderation that's needed. And again, I'll go back to the fact that how quickly you can get the information out of the iPad is a mark of the program you've designed. If you got to tap and click and tap and click, it's not working right for these guys. This has to be fast. And, every application that's out there, that they've all really tried to hone that in. So we're trying to make it more efficient. I mean, coaches communicating on headsets is fraught with problems. And that's a lot of where the review would come in before. And, I think that's a big part of it, right? Just trying to make it more efficient.
We actually have a good question here in the chat too from Jay Thielen 0410. Hashtag Ask Cuppa, which we actually never even used, but I love that he said that. What does Brant think of the increasing reliance of hockey media on predictive stat models that, by all appearances, are incredibly inaccurate?
Yeah, and Brant, let me just say this: I see those online from writers. I can't even begin to decipher 90% of what they're talking about, and I've forgotten more about hockey than 99% of the people who post those videos. And I have no problem being arrogant and saying that because it's a reality.
Incredibly inaccurate. I will qualify that and say their goal is good. The data that they have available at this point is challenging to get where you want to go. I'm not going to get into the debate of people's models and things like that, but I think as a league, we are challenged even more with making sure something is clear enough for most people to use, right? Major League Baseball has the MLB Savant website, which if you ever spend time on that is insane. You're talking about spin rate and how many people from baseball actually go into that. website, fans of baseball going to that website. Not a lot, but the people that do will spend a lot of time on it. So there's still marketing value to have a website like that and sponsorship opportunities for it. We always want to try to make things for everybody. And that's one of the challenges we have as a league, is to come out with things that make sense, have valid discussion points tied to them, especially working with broadcasters. For me, we want to build stuff that broadcasters can use. You throw something on the screen that unlocks something that the talent across the league has.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then all of a sudden they're telling the story about it. We're not talking about data anymore. We're talking about a 2-on-1. We had a great example of that with Mike.
Last night, Anson Carter was talking about something too on TNT with the point shots, right? Point shots that go through. I think it was the Florida LA game.
Yeah, I mean, and that's an interesting one too, right? Like, we have a model that we use, several models in a project called opportunity analysis, and we create a projected goal rate. And with the projected goal rate, there's 4 types of shots, and we basically create those off of 2 different parameters. Does a puck cross the blue line within the 5 seconds leading up to the shot? And then whether that's yes or no, we also look at, does the puck cross the middle of the ice, right? Because that really opens up a different world of having to defend both sides of the ice, having to defend both sides of the net as a goaltender when that happens. And if you want to put that slide up, we can actually talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Right. This is from the playoffs last year. Now, I like to try to stay in the factual world as long as we can.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to my comment about subjectivity.
I love that. Factual world. I love that.
I was a subjective logger in the NHL for 8 years. These fingers logged, 1,000 clips a game, all based off of things my coaches agreed upon. 5 people agreed upon, begrudgingly, because if you've ever heard of a head coach and a goalie coach talk about scoring chances, they're not on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
And so how, outside of getting 5 people to agree on something, are you able to do it? That's one of the challenges with subjective data.
It's happening in our chat right now. People are like disagreeing and agreeing on stuff too.
And that's great. That's part of the debate. Like, as a league, for us, we want the debate. We want to just kind of produce facts. We have 4.7% of the shots last year in the playoffs were goals. That's the actual goal rate. I will say we drop out shots greater than 60 feet and shots from below the goal line, along with empty net shots for now, just because when we trained this model, there weren't enough examples of those. And we got some really funky scores. I mean, if somebody shoots outside of 60 feet, generally they see something, right? The goalie's out of position. The actual goal rate on those was far too high. So as we retrain this, we'll add those back in. But just that's what that star means there.
Can I ask you a question about this goal rate? How does it compare to expected goals percentage? Because that's the stat that everyone loves to throw in your face. And like, to me, I call it this is actual date. Like, these are factual things. Like, to me, I always say to Johnny when he hits me with an expected goals thing, I'm like, expected goals is it's a fantasy. It's not it's a number that is not actual date, like fact. It's a this is what it might be. It's a fantasy number.
We may have avoided using that term just because of the incendiary nature of that in a lot of ways, right? A lot of people live by it and a lot of people question it. And we try to keep this as close to the tracking data as we can until we have to create a model off of it. So one of the things in expected goal rate models you see, and it's not all of them, it depends on the model, but a lot of them don't actually, they only look at shots that hit the net, right? So it's either a save or a goal. But this model looks at blocks, misses as well. So, I know I've heard defensive traffic is a really terrible thing for goaltenders. Well, if you remove the blocks from that equation, yeah, it is. But if you keep the blocks in, how many shots actually get through? How many times does a shooter try to shoot around the pile and miss the net? There's all those interesting discussion points in it, but you can see right off the rush, we had 4.77% actual goal rate, in zone slightly lower, but you can see as we go down more and we look at whether the puck crossed the middle of the ice, how much of that is based off of a rush that gets across the middle of the ice. And that can be a pass or a carry. It makes sense. A lot of times you get somebody who streaks away a little bit, might have a line change, just put the puck on net to get a face off, or it's got some back pressure on him, end of a shift, it just fires one on net. That probably keeps that no cross number a little lower because of it. And if a player approaches the middle of the ice but doesn't get there, our model actually takes that into account and will generally raise a projected goal rate based off of that. So you can see across, right? The ones that cross on the rush are the highest in terms of actual rate in the playoffs last year. Then in zones that cross are next. And then pretty close neck and neck are the no crosses in zone and the no crosses off the rush. Down the bottom, those are PGR numbers. Boston on the rush last year, very effective team. I mean, I think that's been talked about in terms of Jim Montgomery's rush offense and the way that they want to enter this zone. Did I lock up? Am I good?
No, you're good. You're
Okay.
But as we go through it, you can see Edmonton off of in zone rush chances that don't cross the middle. And that's probably due to one player who's extremely good at
burning him wide.
Burning him wide and taking a shot before he gets across the middle of the ice, right? So some other interesting examples in there too. But that's where we are a little different than expected goals in general, largely because we're using the tracking data and a lot of the models are not yet that are publicized. So it's all science, it's all data science, it's all math at the end of the day. And you're going to I've learned enough about it. I'm going to go back and say I was a film school major. I tracked scoring chances for years. That was my first sort of approach to an expected goals model. And, I've learned enough to understand that sometimes the model is going to do things you can't explain when you look at the features in particular. But we feel like we're getting a really good foundation here to start doing some really in-depth analysis off of the tracking data on shot attempts. Well,
and I love looking at that chart. I've never thought about any of that, by the way. And that you showed that to us a little bit before the show. So it's not like I've had 3 days to digest all that. Every good coach I ever had, and you've named some of them, I've played for a bunch of the people you've worked for. They all said one thing: when you can break the box of a team, whether it's on a power play or 5-on-5, and you can get through the middle of the ice, the first thing you think about is attacking the net. 5-on-5, 5-on-4. If you can get through the box of coverage and look at the difference in the percentages that you just put up on the screen, the weighted balance between when you cross middle ice and when you don't. So it's never been presented to me like you just did with numbers, but starting with Coach Parker, going to Claude Julien, Bruce all the guys you mentioned, they all preach that. When you break a team through the middle, the first thing you do is attack the net, good things will happen. So, maybe you're using data without even knowing you're using data at in a juncture like that, which, I think hockey people can digest that.
Well, it's amazing how many times coaches have been proven right by analytics, right? I mean, go back to the 40-second shift. There was research done, 10, 15 years ago now to say that Corsi numbers plummet after 40 seconds. It's like, well, Roger Nielsen kind of had a feel for that. Back in the 70s and 80s, and the scoring chance area, same thing, right? Like coaches have a feel for it and it's generally not wrong. This is trying to put maybe a little more data behind it and even nuance it a little bit more, right? So yeah, I think if you think about when the puck crosses the blue line too, that 5-second window kind of gives us a feel. If somebody comes across a blue line and they stop up, but they still move it quickly to the net, you wouldn't say it's an in-zone clip. But if all 5 players are able to get back into their defensive zone structure, that's the end of the rush. So 5 seconds is a pretty gracious window.
Are coaches still reliant on this though? Do they make decisions based around analytics yet? Because I know, listen, I'm not the biggest baseball fan, but I listen to sports shows and I hear all the time still about how taking out Blake Snell in the 2020 World Series because of analytics was the worst decision ever made in sports. I think he was on fire and hit a certain pitch count and they decided to take him out based on analytics. Are we seeing that in hockey yet? Coaches making decisions based on numbers and based on, let's say, a player's playing time. And if they're a little more tired come third periods, if that's a trend that they will see less shifts in the third, are we getting there?
We are. And I think Colby can attest to it too with the time he spent around clubs. People are making decisions off of it. I think it's probably more front office driven at times in terms of the clientele and the roster they're putting together for a team. But you'll hear coaches cite it all the time. And I think part of it is that they want to find a few things that matter to them. And a lot of times, look, when I was with the Bruins, and I don't think we were a great example of it because we were a very tight-knit group and fairly small in terms of just the size of the hockey operations department. There's a lot of silos, and that's always going to exist. The scouts aren't around the team, right? The analytics team group doesn't travel with the team. How do you break down those silos and find that sort of concentric circle across all of them that connects everybody? How do you make that concentric circle big enough that everybody feels like they're a part of it? That's a challenge in every organization. So the communication between the coaching staff and the analytics department is critical. I also think like people want to feel like they're contributing and they want to feel like they matter. So, you know, there's that whole delicate balance between you offer these things up for coaches. Do coaches want them? How can coaches take the information? How is it presented?
Yeah.
Like everything else, we have projects that we're working on now where we feel like, you know, we probably want to start on the player side of it if we're going to do this, because if we want the players to use a product, it probably is better off if they come up with it first or get used to it first, and then the coaches can come in and help them with it. But if the coaches walk in with something, maybe we don't get as far with them, you know, and it's all how it's presented, I think, but they are starting to make those decisions. Yeah.
But I have kind of a specific example, and this might be a stretch. And Colby, I feel like you might make fun of me for this because this is something that we just kind of argue on the show. But like, and I know the chat's going to make fun of me. This is a Rangers, you know, fan kind of thing. But we often talk about Matt Rempe's ice time on here. And, you know, a lot of games he'll get 7 minutes, 9 minutes, whatever, less than 10 minutes. And that's typically, you know, late second period, third period, his ice time goes down. But that allows the Rangers top guys to get more minutes. And sometimes we criticize the way Peter Laviolette handles Matt Rempe and says like, oh, well, if you dress this guy, you may as well dress another forward because you're only playing 11 forwards if you bench Rempe the whole game, you know?
Well, he only plays 5 minutes. He plays 5 minutes every game.
But maybe we're not even thinking about some sort of analytic that says like, you know, Jimmy Vesey or you know, another Rangers winger is better as the game progresses. Sometimes like you find your legs later in a game. Like I remember me as a player, my first periods were my worst period of the game. Like my legs felt better as the game went on. Like second period, I was better. Third period, I was better. I'm just making a total stretch here, but is there any possible data point or stat that could prove that? I know I see the chat saying stop with it. This isn't really about.
What's the question though?
The question is just like, can you look at, maybe it's not trusting Rempe. Maybe it's just like a stat or something we see with other players that can turn it on later in a game. Like, is there a stat that tells that story? It's probably a stupid point, but this is just me being me.
Yeah, it's called 5 a.m. Charles River runs with Mike Boyle being in really good condition.
Yeah, I mean, the chat's making me feel insecure about it now.
Was Wookville still a thing, Colby?
Oh, it was still a thing. Oh yeah. Oh, I found myself in there more than one time. Look, I'm gonna rescue Johnny here a little bit.
Thank you.
I don't really know what the question
it made sense in my head, and then
I'll make a comment. Slicing into data is critical, and what I mean by slicing into data is taking situations in the game and dropping them in over the top of data that exists. That's breakouts. I when coaches talk about what we track, or when people reference coaches track breakouts. What's a breakout? Stop. How many times in a game is a puck dumped in a trade? I can't stand watching youth hockey coaches work on the breakout. How many times in a youth hockey game does a puck get dumped into the corner? And if it's happening a lot, like let your kids try to enter the zone. Anyway,
yeah,
that's another podcast there's a real hot button topic for me. But like the breakout that's most effective is, how do you get out of defensive zone coverage into your breakout and transition to offense? How do you transition a turnover? Video coaches track all that. They go in and don't say breakout. They'll say transition from D-zone coverage. They'll say control breakout, where they set up behind the net. Like being able to slice into situations with more specificity still applies to the data world, right? You want to look at those numbers when they're trailing, when they're leading. How about after a power play? People talk about that all the time, right? The slicing into data gives you far greater insights, 100%. So I think you're right there to say, is there a stat? Sure. I mean,
well, some guys just like fall off as the game goes on. Other guys.
Well, you hear it all the time. You give a guy too many minutes, they're going to be prone to more mistakes, which is why a lot of times when a young player comes into the National Hockey League, you've got to manage their minutes, because for them, the first thing that happens when you get tired is here goes, right? Like your body gets tired and your brain starts to go. And that's when you see young players make mistakes.
Yep.
So you got to learn, like, how do you manage a guy's minutes in order to set him up to be successful? I'm sure there's underlying data.
Yeah,
Brant,
it was a poorly worded question, but
that
that's
you
kind
can
of what I was
pull
getting
out
at.
and find into that.
I mean, we have our Edge site now. The Edge portion of NHL.com has speed bursts. It has maximum speeds. Some of the more interesting stuff to study, right? I don't think Nathan McKinnon's in the top 10 in maximum speeds per player.
Yeah,
but it's number one in speed bursts over 20 miles an hour.
You also said something that was really interesting to me that I've had some experience with, just in talking to my own, agent who I still work with on all my broadcasting stuff, but is a hockey agent, represents a lot of friends of mine. And when teams are looking to fill their rosters with depth players, they definitely, GMs dig into the analytics. Like, they want to look how they are on the rush. They want to look how are they on, denying zone entries if they're defensemen, their passing numbers, things like that. I saw Jeff putting that in the chat earlier, Jeff Merrick, but that is pretty interesting. My question for you, Brant, is, do you see that utilized more by a GM when they're putting teams together, or do you see it more by a coach on a day-to-day basis when they're putting a lineup together? Because I would think it would be more in the front office with the GM, but I've never been in those meetings or I worked in Chicago for a couple of years. I think Kyle Davidson, who people label as an analytics guy, I don't believe that to be true at all. I think Kyle's a guy who likes analytics, but he finds it to be one slice of a large pizza. But I think people sometimes label him because he has a little bit of a non-traditional, call it, upbringing in the game. So I'm curious from your perspective what you've seen, and I'm not asking you to talk about any individuals, names, teams, but what have you at least seen in your role as to how it's being deployed for putting a team together?
I mean, I think those decisions have always been made night to night, right? There are certain games Sean Thornton didn't dress, and there's certain ones he did. I think there's certain games where coaches will make a decision on the power play and maybe moving something around. I mean, Boston at different points in time, Big Z was in front of the net in the power play.
I remember.
But
the comeback against Toronto, they put him down.
Would you do
there.
that every night? Would you do right?
Yeah.
Would you do that every game, or is it something you saw? And I think if coaches have got to the point that they trust something, that's going to factor into their judgment and their decision making. So I do, again, feel like coaches are going to make a decision based off of like pairings. There was a player in Boston that I remember Claude saying, I could watch his first shift. I could tell the way he handled the puck, and I would know how much he was going to play that night.
On one shift.
There's some hyperbole there, but
early on in the game.
Early on in the game, he just knew whether maybe the pace was too much for him. There were other nights where he played a ton, and then there were other nights he played a modest amount, right? It wasn't someone he would bench, but like, they have that gut. That gut is tied to something, right or wrong. Now they're starting to get more things than video and gut. Yeah. But the gut is always what matters. I mean, go back to Mike Sullivan again, talking about face-offs, and he said in articles, it doesn't matter what the numbers are in the game. There's one guy I'm putting out at the end of the game to take the draw. But the more they get different components to factor into their decision making, if they trust it, they're going to use it. It's gonna be in their head, and they're going to think about using it. So even when it comes to rosters decisions,
Johnny, I think we have to. I want to keep this moving into, because I see people asking about.
There's a lot of good questions. There's a lot of good questions.
The edge stuff, I think people really want to hear about, and some of the tilt and all that I think maybe will be new to everyone. It was brand new to me when I was reading it. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. Like, we have, I coach a junior team, Brant, in Jersey, the Titans in the North American League, and the portal that we use, it's the TPE software. We get a bunch of analytical data. I'll take a look at it. I'm most interested in face-offs and like how much time we spent in our zone versus their zone. I don't go too into the weeds on it because I screen the games, and like for the most part, numbers sort of match what, are matching what I'm seeing. But when I saw some of the stuff you sent us, I was like, wow, now this is stuff that I feel like I could really actually sink my teeth into. This felt like very digestible data, and very, very, usable stuff that is easy to understand and explain. So, we've had you on for 40 minutes. We've been firing a lot of questions at you. I do want to give it the next 10 or 15 minutes to really talk about the NHL Edge project and like the tilt stuff you were showing and talking about. Like, I just basically want to give you the floor to talk about it, and then we'll probably fire some questions your way. But it really is fascinating, and I think that is stuff people will really enjoy here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, let's start with ice tilt then, because you mentioned it, and it's probably quicker to get through than opportunity analysis, which is just a fire hose. NHL Edge is our tracking data. NHL Edge IQ is something that is a series of projects that we build out with Amazon Web Services, AWS. They're our partner on these projects. And one of the things, if you've seen face-off probability during games that pops up on the score bug, that was the second project we did with them, which is remarkable when someone gets thrown out of a draw and you see them change on the fly in front of you. That's all the tracking data and the processing and the machine learning model behind the scenes that's being put out in sub-second latency. It's fast. It's amazing to see it. But with ice tilt, like if we looked at the game from last night, well, let's say I'll explain it for us first before you throw that up. But you mentioned zone time before. I don't like zone time. I think zone time is fine. I think zone time is something we did because it was easy to have anybody say upstairs, when's the puck on this side of the blue line or on this side of the other blue line. But every time a defenseman, if you're a team that stretches the play out a bit in the neutral zone and hangs on to it, makes some DDD passes, trying to find some offense with some speed, you're getting dinged as a demerit every time you do that.
Right.
And that's exactly the same thing in the data world to when a puck gets dumped in and there's a line change and there's only one forechecker. It's also the same as when you get hemmed around your own net for 15 seconds and all 10 skaters are below the tops of the circles. It's not detailed enough. It certainly doesn't measure anything to do with momentum. You're talking about one moment in time. And the key thing on any sort of an offensive zone presence is how much more time that leads to. You can be one and done on the rush, but if you don't recover the puck's out of the zone, now you're going back the other way. You're not really doing a good job of creating any sort of momentum in the game. So I got to present this ice tilt idea to Jack Hughes. Go back to when I said I work with Jim Hughes. Yeah. VHS. Now I'm explaining a machine learning model to Jack Hughes at the All-Star game. His son, who at that point, one of the Hughes boys wasn't born yet. So anyway, that's how old I am and how much stuff I've been around in my career. But I asked him what it feels like when your team is gaining momentum in a game. And he mentioned something to the effect of, when we're jumping over the boards, multiple shifts in a row, and we're keeping the puck in the offensive zone, and we're really just hemming them in, and they can't get up ice with it enough, we really feel like we're tilting the ice against them. And I smiled and I laughed because I had not told him what the project was called. And I'm like, that's great because we're calling it ice tilt. And he said, you're calling it ice tilt? I said, we're calling it ice tilt. And he's like, that's amazing. And it's true. We've heard this phrase for years on broadcasts.
Yeah,
and it's such
tilted.
And it's a feeling, right? I didn't play at a high level, but I know what it's like, mostly playing D. You can't, it's the worst feeling in the world. And it feels like you are trying to push a puck uphill and it just keeps coming back at you. So ice tilt measures the location of all the players on the ice. That's the play location. Ice tilt is calculated when you look at that and the preceding 119 seconds. So for the last 2 minutes, what has the average play location been? We're not looking at the puck. If you stick a pin in the middle of all the players, that's what's going to give you the play location. And you take that out over the previous 2 minutes. So now it's not only a tactical or a territorial stat, it's also momentum based. Because if you really want to generate a good amount of ice tilt, you have to have that multiple shift effect like we talked about.
Well, that's where the saying comes from.
So you created this ice tilt model and now you give it to every team? Or how does that work?
Teams have access to it. Broadcasters have access to it. Yeah. And it's appeared a lot on NHL Network's done some great stuff with it. It's been very highly featured on our daily casts with Turner, which is kind of cool. That was I was on the headset for that Western Conference Finals last year with the talent, and I got to sit in the TV booth, TV control room, something I've never done before. And along with watching, I still think the current shift duration at the bottom of the screen, knowing who's got the fresh legs, knowing like the puck's about to leave the offensive zone. This player's been out for 40 seconds. This could go south really quick. And that was one of the things they had me do is they're like, hey, if you see that coming, give us a heads up. And I would chirp in their ear and say, hey, 40 seconds, puck's leaving the zone. This guy's going to get stuck in his zone if it's sure enough. But like being able to have that backed up by the ice tilt and say, remember when that guy didn't get off the ice? Look at the growth in ice tilt now because of it. And we do have the one graph from the Jersey game we can put up to show it. So what you're looking at here from left to right is the game itself, right? The first section is the first period. The middle section is the second. Last period is the third. And you can see the time spent with tilt, meaning when the play was on the other side of the red line for your team. So in the Devils case, they had the play on the old habits die hard, on the offensive side of the ice, 34 minutes of the game. But what's really interesting is when you go in and look at, you can see when this line moves north, it's heading towards the Bruins defensive zone. And when it's heading south here towards the bottom of the screen, it's heading towards the Devils defensive zone. You can see the different colors on the line. Those represent power plays. So you're able to see how effective power plays are, right? So the Devils got a power play in the first period there, but they had already tilted the ice significantly. It's not going to jump up a lot more, but you can see in there were probably at least half or partial clears a couple times on that first power play by the Devils in the first period. And then the lines I dropped in over the top show where the goals are. So while this game was a 5-1 game, the first period was really back and forth. Second period opened up a bit more, right? I mean, and then the third period, you can see it's the Bruins actually did a decent job of hanging tough for most of it, I think. Just looking at it again, I was not able to watch this game live, but it's interesting for me. Now as a coach, if I'm going to use this, I'm going to go in and look at that moment right next to the Devils logo where the game shifted. So Bruins had a power play, that yellow streak there to the left of the screen. Then it goes down, and then there's a hard pivot. I want to go in and watch that moment and see what happened at that point in time because it led to a Devils power play.
Wow.
Right. And then you go into the second period and you look at the end of the Bruins power play. Again, huge spike in ice tilt right there. What happens in those swings?
What a great way for a coach to be able to look at this graph and then revisit points of the game. We all see coaches on the bench, with their pens generally, and I know every coach is a little bit different. They're just putting little time. A lot of times just okay, 10:54 turnover and the number of the player or goal, whatever. So they're like doing it by hand. With that graph, you don't really have to sit there and necessarily take notes on your notepad anymore for a coach or on your lineup card because that graph is giving me an idea of what all the big events are in a game. So, I mean, that is awesome. Now, there is one question in the chat that I want to go back to from Jay Miller.
Hang on. Let me just make a comment on what you just said, though.
Okay,
right?
Go ahead. Yeah.
That graph is not new. There's plenty of places that have used that graph for other things like Corsi differential and things like that, right? So that's, remember what Steve Jobs said that he stole from Pablo Picasso: good artists borrow, great artists steal, right? That's half of the whole analytics community sees these great bubble charts and they borrow each other. And I mean, there's nobody that you can't copyright a line graph. And we just feel like ice tilt is an even better representation of it because it takes a lot to make that line move.
It's probably my favorite thing I've seen in analytics, honestly, is ice tilt. I think it's my favorite thing. Can I ask the question from Jay Miller, Johnny, or do you have a follow-up?
It's a different topic. There's a follow-up.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I saw a couple comments about why the Carolina Hurricanes are always the analytical darlings. And
that's good to get into PGR and ice tilt, but go ahead.
They're always number one in ice tilt. Always.
Yeah.
Because Carolina's always in control of the play in the offensive zone. But it doesn't mean they're always making good of it.
Well, but they put such a premium on possessing
pressure.
the puck.
Yeah.
But they don't give the puck up. You watch Carolina play, like they don't. even when they soft chip a puck, it's a soft chip to
They
themselves.
recover everything.
Even when they dump a puck, it gets by the goalie every single time, and whoever's on the weak side comes down the wall and gets their body around it and possesses it. So, like, I again, without knowing the numbers, like that's what I see.
They are number one.
Play.
Yeah, they are number one.
They are, and I'll go back to the playoffs last year, and I have some stats here, some numbers that support ice tilt. Right, Carolina was first in time on ice, time with tilt per game, rather. Okay. Florida, Cup champs, third, time with tilt per game. Number 2, any guesses?
I mean, I know the answer, so I'm not going to guess, but
is it Edmonton?
Edmonton.
Yeah.
And these are all during the regular season, not the playoffs, right? So you're talking about actually looking at the regular season and then comparing it to how they finished. 9 out of the top 10 teams in the league, according to the final standings, had more than 30 minutes of time with tilt per game. 11 out of the 16 playoff teams played with greater than 30 minutes of time with tilt per game. Of the 5 playoff teams that played with less than 30 minutes of time with tilt per game, only 1 advanced past the first round.
Wow.
None advanced past the second round. You know who that one team was? We talked about offense a little bit more earlier on.
Was it Colorado?
Goaltending.
They were.
Sorry, I couldn't. You were both talking. So what's the question, John? Who'd you say?
Think goaltending. Who was a sick goalie in the playoffs last year?
Shesterkin.
No. Swayman.
It was
Swayman. Okay. Got it. Okay.
Again, I think that's more due to how they try to generate offense than anything else. That was their style. They were an exceptional team on the rush. Yeah. But does that leave you in a great place to recover the pucks like the Carolina Hurricanes do?
No.
And it probably does not.
Yeah.
So, then anyway, 12 of the 16 teams that missed the playoffs played with less time with tilt than their opponents. Go back and look at that and say, we like this. Boy, does this make us feel like we have something with it.
I feel like everybody learned something new today with ice tilt, myself included. But again, I want to hit this question because I do think it's really interesting. Jay Miller asked, do NHL officials use any of this data or tech during games? Or I'll ask you the question a little bit more generally. Maybe you can answer it. Maybe you can't. Are you guys working on developing tools for those guys? Because I say this all the time, like, refereeing in real time is so difficult. I've been saying they need to give the ref an earpiece and they need to have a partner upstairs who is literally, in my opinion, live communicating with them. The game is too fast. I'm between the benches for NHL games and I get a TV monitor and I can see 6 replays of things before I have to give you an opinion on television, right? Like, it's almost, you're asking officials to do the impossible with how fast the game is, how big everybody is. You can barely see out there. That's one thing people don't realize. Like, you stack a bunch of 6'3" bodies, you can't see, right? Yeah. So is that something you guys ever talk about? Like, I think this is a great question by Jay.
It is. And unfortunately, I don't work in that department. And I certainly am not going to make a lot of comments on it. But I know we're always evaluating new technology. But to make official decisions that affect things so seriously, like wins and losses, points, it has to be irrefutable. And we're probably, as a league, and I'm trying not to get out, not that I have any say in any of this, I can't imagine anything is going to be used until the margin for error is small enough that they have the utmost confidence in it, right? And I think that's what we're always working towards. And technology is exponentially advancing. But I think those are the things that hold us back in that a little bit. So.
All right, I have another question from the chat, and this one.
We got to talk a little bit about PGR too.
We'll get into that. I just want to ask this one as well, and this one is probably putting you more on the hot seat. Okay. This is from Jeff Marek, friend of ours, friend of the show. I'm sure you know Jeff
not a friend of mine, but I've listened to him a lot, so I respect him.
He has a great show on our
network. You not know him personally?
I've never met him, but anyway.
Wow.
Well, he has a show that's 1 hour at 3 p.m. Every day on the network. So
I imagine you'd be a guest for that.
Yeah, you'd be a great guest for that show too. But go ahead, Johnny, ask the question.
From Jeff, based on the numbers Brant deals with, who does he think is the most underrated player in the league? Who are we all missing on? If you say Capo Caco, we're kicking you off.
I mean, I try not to. It was funny at that event at the Winter Classic. They asked me who was going to win the game, and I was like, I'm not going to say that. And then
I think we did say Blues.
They asked Andrew from AWS, and right away it was like, Chicago is not going to win. So it's going to be St. Louis. And he just called it out. I was like, just come on, there's a little dance you got to do to make it not sound like. The guy I watched a lot lately is Rope Hintz.
Oh, that's a good one.
I got to watch Patrice Bergeron, and I got to watch the brain on him and David Krejci. And I just
was so good.
The way that Hintz plays with his size and his speed and his intelligence. There was a clip, it was a Robertson goal a couple weeks ago. I might have sent it to you, Johnny. It was awesome. Like it was a puck that started inside their blue line. It was a chip off the glass. He might have tapped it off the glass again to get it deep. Forechecked, great pre-bump, didn't knock him out of his skates. Something you talk about with kids when you talk about trying to throw a pre-bump. You're not trying to knock somebody's head off with it. You're trying to stand them up. And it was like this unbelievable pulled punch that he threw as a pre-bump, comes out with the puck, and he's covering up high. Then he's coming down low. He gets a piece of the puck with one stick, breaks up it on the forecheck. It goes across to Robertson. They score. And I'm like, my gosh, what a clip from this guy. He's someone that I think is really underrated. But again, I guess I just referred back to, I did find that clip using opportunity analysis, but that wasn't from the numbers. That was more from me watching a clip and saying, this is outside of what opportunity analysis is going to see in terms of pointing at Rope Hintz. But so many of these numbers, the confusion and difficulty that's represented for the defending team in these numbers come from the work he did on that shift.
Yeah. I mean, that playoff run they had, 2 years ago? 2023, 22, 23. He was on a tear in those playoffs. I remember we were talking about him for potentially being like a Conn Smythe candidate. It was 22, 23.
Yeah, so I took a guy that probably is not that underrated.
No.
But we're talking about underrated players, right?
Yeah. But he plays in Dallas, and he doesn't get and Miro. I have no idea what the numbers look like, but I'd say that about Rope Hintz and Miro Heiskanen are like real superstars that we don't. They play in Dallas. It's a smaller market, and we don't ever give those guys enough love. Yeah, we just don't give them enough love, and they should. They should get a lot of love.
They got a pretty good coach too.
Yeah,
he doesn't get enough credit. His presentation on rush defense a couple of years ago at the NHL Coaching Clinic was unbelievably insightful, and it was just, he just presents things so clearly and matter of factly and cleanly, and it was great.
I almost played for Pete in Kitchener. When I was at that fork in the road as a 15-year-old deciding, which again now you don't have to make that decision with the new rules, which is a whole different conversation. But
so you can ride buses and hang out at the dugout.
Exactly.
I met him at
they don't hang out at the dugout anymore, which is pretty disappointing. But
it's a generational thing, I think.
I think Billy had enough of that bar. I don't even think he owns it anymore. But Pete, I think he's as good a coach as there is in the National Hockey League. I'd love to see him lift that big silver trophy here at some point. All right, look, we are running a little bit out of time here, but I do want to talk about PGR with you, and I want to give you an opportunity to teach us all about PGR.
You guys have me as long as you need me. You make the calls there. But so projected goal rate, we put that up on the screen before. We have opportunity analysis. We look at every shot attempt. Remember this, at the point of release, we're not looking at player impact. We're not looking at goalie impact, shooter impact, none of that. Anything that happens post-release, we're not talking about. We're saying when this puck leaves the stick, what's the projected goal rate here? Some of the larger ones are a little undersized, if you would, and you'll see some of that today, but I think they're always worthy of debate because there's a chance someone flubs a puck. If a player flubs a puck because a pass is moving at 60 miles an hour, which I believe one of the clips we have is going to be at that speed. There's a chance it doesn't come off a stick clean, even at the NHL level. There's a chance he misses the net. There's a chance it's blocked. There's always a chance the goalie gets across and makes a save in most cases. So that's what we're looking at with this. And I forget what was the first one we had as an example now.
I think Dawson Mercer.
Yeah. So if we start with the actual video clip of that first, just so we get a feel for it, and then we'll go to the screenshot and look at what the puck sees at the point of release. Right. So we watch this one here. And let's look at the amount of traffic on that one at the point of release. Right. Remember this, and we'll go to the still frame of it in a second. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if we go to the still frame of that point of release, which I had next in our slideshow.
Yeah.
Like That's approximately the point of release.
Wow.
Okay? And when you look at that, there's 3 sets of sticks on it. There's another defenseman in the back that might block it. You know, you don't know if he's going to be able to, largely because at this point in time, we're talking about 1 tag on the player. So if we go to the next still frame I had, which is our goal replay, our Edge replay on NHL.com. It's great. Check it out. It's now in our game summaries. You can watch a sprite view replay of the application. Like, that's what tracking data sees essentially. It sees dots and it sees the puck, and each dot is a player, right? So at that point in time, even though that's prime real estate, and we're going to go to the next one, producer's doing a great job.
Snaps for Vic.
It's snaps for Vic, 100%. If he goes to the next one that gives us the opportunity analysis breakdown, we can see that the PGR, I think, is around 5%. But you'll see all the data we process with this, right? That puck is 7.76 feet from the middle. It's 15.56 feet from the goal line. That is prime real estate. If you look at the pie chart down below, that is what really affects this the most, where this shot is. But pretty much everything else is lowering that projected goal rate, right? And if we looked at that, this was a cross. This puck did not cross the middle, right? And it's an offensive zone chance. The average on that is only 2.84 in terms of the actual goal rate in the playoffs last year. Sorry, it's 3.6. That's in zone, 3.606 in zone. So you're still talking well above average for a chance. But the fact is, you're talking about a square goaltender. How do we know it's square other than looking at the video? Well, his height is at 53%, and the model here says that's probably a good thing for where this puck is located. He's only 5 degrees off the puck line. I love the fact that we get goalie angle now. We calculate that by his tag to the middle of the net, and then the middle of the net to the puck. I'm going to use the word vector. I hope that's okay, Colby, or BU guy. I'm sure it's fine. Right? Like, those are the 2 lines we use to calculate the middle in between them. He's square, right? That's enough, because that tag's off center, to maybe just be that alone.
And just so you all know what he's talking about when he says the tag, every jersey now has like a little tag right behind, around the nameplate. You can kind of see it because it's a little bit raised. But just so everybody's familiar, when he says tag, every jersey has that tag.
Right. It's Mika Zibanejad's fault that they do that now.
That is, well, it wasn't due to hair. Yeah, it was. If it's in the middle, it gets covered. And the greatest story about that is it was the test game that we were doing, and it was dropping out left and right. And we were not able to track players, and we didn't know what was going on. This is back when we were first developing the tracking system. I was not with the league at that point. It was because they were using it on a high school girls team, and the ponytails were obscuring the tags. Yeah. So we moved it to the side to make sure that flow, regardless of the gender, was accounted for.
And what's so interesting on that clip and those screenshots is, like, if I'm the coach and I'm looking at that, Patra's in a good spot as the strong side winger. Marshy's in even better spot as the weak side winger. Like, they all have good sticks, right? Like,
Swayman square.
Swayman can see it, and he's square.
And Brezzo has a stick on it too.
This is where the still frame thing gets messed up, though. Now go back and watch it. Watch how he shoots that puck. It's like a trick shot on a golf course. He's coming around, and he's one-timing that, like, over the top, right next to his foot, and somehow it finds him that. That's one you go, yeah, okay, move on. Right. Every coach is going to watch that video afterwards and go, next.
Yeah. Like, tip your cap. Like that's just, we're not going to beat you up on your D zone coverage here, because everybody is exactly where you asked them to be on this goal.
And if Swayman couldn't see it, do you really want them not to be there? Right. Exactly. Like, that's the traffic is a beneficial thing. But if we have a chance, let's go to the other ones, because those are a little more spicy, because the projected goal rate's a lot higher on those. And they're similar plays, right, to each other. This one and the next one we'll watch. So there's so much. If we can pause it right here, baby, back up just a hair. Okay. This is the stuff I love. At what point in time does Markstrom know this isn't a shot? Like, and then say, factor in how long it takes you to actually react in the grand scheme of things. Pastrnak looks at the net here the whole time.
And there's no passing lane right now, in my opinion.
None.
Here. Yeah.
None. And so when we now pass it, and let's pause it again when it gets to Geeky stick, right? Like, we're talking about the fact that Markstrom didn't even know. There's a little bit of movement when we watch it from the overhead, I think we have, but there's also a good chance the shot gets blocked, right?
Yeah. It's also pasta. Like
Yeah.
you're thinking Pasta's going to shoot that, right? I mean, that's a tendency. Like he's one of the best shooters in the National Hockey League.
Probably nobody doesn't.
Yeah, honestly. But Markstrom played that 98% shot, 2% pass.
Right. And
I don't even think I think 2% is generous. I don't even think he played any percent pass there.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. And that puck crosses the middle of the ice. When it crosses the middle of the ice, it's going at 60 miles an hour. I'm going to say that again. So it probably slowed down maybe a mile an hour or two by the time it got to Geeky, but he one-timed, and this is where it's great to call out these ninjas, these guys that are just like
unreal.
It's a 60 mile an hour pass and he's one-timing and he crushes it. So let's look at the PGR on it. 45.56.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's a cross in the offensive zone. Play never left the zone, which is why it wasn't a rush, but that's one of those ones where, could it be a rush? Hypothetically, defense isn't totally set up, but it never left the zone. So we're calling it an end zone clip. But look at his angle, 75 degrees. That pass was worth 75 degrees of his line to the puck. 30 of that is the last one you'll see in that list there. Goalie angle change is one of my favorites. In the last quarter of a second, how much did the goalie's angle to the puck grow or shrink? 30 degrees is what it grew. In the last quarter of a second, right? The angle on that first shot was 5 degrees. Talking about 70 degrees different. You're talking about 70 degrees different here, and 30 of that was in the last quarter of a second. That to me is like the really neat thing about this is you can actually see those numbers to go along with it, and it gives you some. You look at that and you're like, could Markstrom have tracked that any better?
So then let me put you on the hot seat here, and I'm going to ask you to be a coach again. I know you haven't done that in a little bit, but you coach youth hockey, right? You're a youth hockey coach and dad. Put your coach hat on. What are you doing with that information now?
Okay,
like you have that now. Where's it go, and how are you using it?
The faster the puck crosses the middle of the ice, the greater the scoring chance. Let's start there. Okay, that's one of the things that we see some pretty good correlation with. So if I'm a defender and I'm on a 2-on-1, let's make it a little more conventional than a broken play like that one was. Is my game plan going to change now? And as a coach, do I try to complicate the pass as much as possible? Because if I get the offensive player to sauce the puck, it's going to be a slower pass.
Mm-hmm.
The goalie's going to have more time to get over. And if he's going to sauce it, it's usually more of a telegraph pass than a shot pass, which basically that was, right? That was a hook pass almost, where he looks like he's going to fire it, and then he turns his hand over and the toe of the stick wraps around the puck a little more. Those are the things I think you can talk about. I think there's a way to look at those and say, okay, that's a good debate we want to have. Do we tell our D and do we talk to the goalie coach about, do we hang on a little more on that strong side post before we release? Everybody talks about, and it's different with every coaching staff, and it's probably a little dated in some ways, but you don't just turn and take the shooter or take the passer and give the goalie the shooter. It's the NHL. You can't let somebody walk inside the near side post. But do you complicate that pass a little bit more, knowing that a slower pass gives a goalie a better chance to get across? I mean, that's how I think about that stuff.
Yeah. This one, honestly, just like a funny story. I don't even know if I told Colby this last year, but kind of reminds me, like, sometimes you just have to tip your cap too, right? Like, that's a sick pass by Pasta. And I don't know how much better the Devils could have defended that, to be honest. Like, maybe if I think Luke Hughes was the defenseman on Geeky, could have had his stick maybe in a better lane there. But I asked Peter Laviolette last year in like a press conference after the Rangers played the Oilers, and I think Connor McDavid had like a sick goal. And I was like, Peter, I know you're the coach against the other team here, but with a talent like Connor McDavid, do you ever just, look at a play he makes and go, all right, that was pretty cool? And he was like, well, if you're thinking that, I'm probably thinking, well, that's pretty, we got to fix that. Like, it was such a dumb question by me, just like thinking a coach would be in awe of someone else's talent. And I see a play like this and I think, oh, maybe Sheldon Keefe was like, oh, what a sick pass by Pasternak. But like,
sometimes you just get beat. He's the best player in the world.
But the coaches won't like think that way.
I'll say go back to the coaching thing. Youth hockey. Do I ever work on 2-on-1s in practice? Not really, because we should give up 2-on-1s, right? Like, yeah, you got to introduce them to that environment. Maybe you create a game where they can encounter a 2-on-1. But the truth is, and this is what I learned from the greatest coaches in the world, you show them a goal and you have the pre-roll set to 30 seconds. Almost every time they tell you to back it up further.
Yeah.
Why? Because the coachable thing doesn't happen 10 seconds before the goal. The thing they need to address is before that.
It can be 50 seconds. It can go back 50 seconds, minute and a half. It could be a bad change. It could be your team changed and you didn't get the puck down below the goal line. You didn't keep it away from the goalie, whatever. And like, those are usually where the breakdowns happen. They usually start 2 or 3 zones away. So, Jonny, I don't know if there's any other questions you want to throw Brant's way. I know we have a couple of other things we have to get to in the show today, sponsored items, but this was really fascinating. I have a feeling you're going to be hearing from Jeff Marek. I have a feeling there's going to be some other people asking to come on their shows. Mike DeMella and Larry Venice, they send their best. I sent them the stream and I said, you guys should pop on and give this a watch. You might recognize the gentleman sitting in the middle. So
there's so many people I owe a lot to, but I definitely owe a lot to them, and I probably owe some apologies too. But
yeah, well, I think I probably do too. So we'll wrap those up and give them together as a gift. But really appreciate you gave us over an hour today. Again, this is the type of data that I can appreciate because I think it's usable, digestible data, and it's not you're not living in a fantasy reality. And I can appreciate that. And again, Jonny said this would be really fascinating today after he met you. And he was right, which I don't say very often. And I think that, I think our audience probably really appreciated this today because it's a little different than what we normally do. So I just want to say thank you. And we really appreciate you coming on the show today and explaining some of this behind the scenes work that you're doing.
This is a blast. This is the best part of the job, talking about this stuff. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're going to need you on again, maybe come playoff time and stuff. I think it's cool hearing like 11 out of 6 teams that play with north of 30-minute ice time.
Yeah.
Like, I find those stats very interesting. Like even the question of, which team that had less than 30 minutes made it out of the first round. Like I think
we're gonna have way more rolled up stuff here in the near future to be able to talk about too, and that would be fun to recap with you guys. So
yeah, cool. Yeah. All right, well, we'll check in whenever you want in the early part of spring when we start getting going. Hopefully, you'll have an hour to give us at some point then, because I know our chat will be asking to bring you back. I mean, people are already saying you guys need to get this guy on regularly. We need to get him his own show. There's been a lot of comments like that. There's been a lot of comments like that in the chat.
Awesome.
Thanks, Brant. Appreciate it. That was awesome. I told you he'd be great, right? Like the way that he just explains the data, it's very obtainable. When I sat, what are you smiling at?
J-Rock's
J-Rock, yeah, I saw that.
Can we get a stat for
only one? It's one per show.
Incoherent questions from Jonny. All right. I got to get to practice here. And so let's get to the other areas of the show that we gotta hit.
Brant Berglund was brought to you by our sponsor, Proraso, the most complete choice for shaving and beard care, made in Italy since 1948. Proraso has been a staple of Italian culture and barbershops globally for 4 generations. So get 15% off at Proraso-USA.com with our promo code Hockey15. And before I get into Out West, you guys know it's Thursday. We do our Out West Worst Team of the Week every Thursday. Put in the chat if you have any guesses. We always like to give you a minute to guess on which team will be the worst team of the week. This one should be fairly obvious just based on results, but I'm curious to hear what the chat has to say. So let's give a quick word from our sponsor, OutWest. Ladies, don't miss the chance to snag high-quality OutWest women's apparel at unbeatable prices. And guys, our polos and hats are on sale too, perfect for refreshing your wardrobe without stretching your budget. But don't wait. At these prices, what's left of our inventory won't last long. If you see it in your size, grab it fast because it could be the very last one. Head over to outwest.us. That's right, brand new URL, outwest.us. Use our code Cuppa, C-U-P-P-A, in all caps to shop the winter closeout sale today. And this week's Out West Worst Team of the Week, I'm seeing a lot of guesses. Seattle, Canucks, Avs. People saying Canucks, maybe we should have taken that into consideration more. But the only team that has not won a game from last week to this point of this week is the San Jose Sharks. They blow a 5-1 lead on the road in Nashville. It probably hurts Colby's feelings to say the San Jose Sharks are the worst team of the week because of Macklin Celebrini and Will Smith, who both had, pretty strong games. Macklin had that nice goal against Nashville. Will Smith had that great game in Boston.
He's coming around. Will
We're
Smith.
going on results based this week. And
it's
the Sharks.
Let me say this too. I was looking. So I looked at, I followed Brant on Twitter, and I started looking at all the different people that followed him that are followers that I know. Like, you're talking college head coaches, college assistant coaches, you're talking NHL video coaches, TV people, AHL head coach, Tampa scout, Mike Kelly, who's obviously a data guy, Goyens. I see NHL agents follow him.
I told you he's legit.
There's you look and see, like, Boston College head coach follows him, Michigan State, like, you see people that are pretty interested in what he's doing. So and that's where that's where I get frustrated, because there is a really, really good use of data. It's just even he said, like, he's worked as a video coach. He understands the subjectivity of it. He understands that not all this information is even useful because you're not taking into account enough. So I just thought that was interesting as I was scrolling through that whole followers you may know. So all right, Johnny, what else we got? We got OutWest. I think we got Bet365, right?
We got Bet365, and we're going with Jeremiah again. Jeremiah hit the bet last night, and I bet against him. I took Colorado because, me, the Avs are my team out west. But Jeremiah likes the Montreal Canadiens on the money line tonight. Montreal has been one of the hottest teams in the NHL as of late. They're on the road playing the Red Wings tonight. Detroit, after having a pretty good win streak, has now slipped and lost 3 straight games. They lost to Philly in overtime on Tuesday night, Dallas previously before that, and Tampa before that. They've only scored 1 goal in each of their last 3 games. So Philly's having a hard time putting the puck in right now, while Montreal, they're firing. Lane Hudson, like we talked about yesterday with Eric Engels, Patrick Laine has been money, Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, Slavkovsky has goals, I think, in back-to-back games. So Montreal on the money line at plus 100, getting plus money, or I guess even money in this case, is pretty good against the Detroit team that seems to be slipping right now. So Jeremiah, I like this one a lot. I'll ride with you on this one. And, let's hope for Montreal to get another win.
All right. Well, look, that's going to do it for our week. Again, we leave comments, by the way, on YouTube, because, obviously we see the chat, but if you leave comments, we can always use those comments and gauge what you guys thought of these different things.
Yeah.
I mean, from what we see in the chat, people
chat was
really
great today.
I know there's a lot of people that they don't participate in the chat that watch our show. Look, we want to hear from you too. So leave a comment and let us know what you thought, because again, it's easy for us to go back to a guest and say, this was a show that did really well for us and the comments were really great. But here's what people want to know next time. Like, if you guys are now prepped, next time we have Brant on our show, we kind of can use your guys' opinions as to inform where we go with him next time. Since today was kind of the introductory, we got the baseline of it. Next time we can get more into questions and fire, rapid fire types of things. So make sure you like the episode. Make sure you leave comments on the episode, not just the chat. For those of you who are not chatters, follow the DFO YouTube page. I'm sure you'll see him on the sheet at some point. If I was a betting man, I would bet on that. So again, a great week, great audience, great support as always. Johnny has one thing to say, as he always does. Go ahead, Johnny. Take the floor.
I'm just going to say I will not be on Monday's show. I'll be traveling back from Western Canada. So you'll be free from Rangers talk, probably, I would assume, on Monday for the people that hate the Rangers.
You got to stop apologizing for that. When the Rangers are a story, we're going to talk about them. They're an original 6 team, right? Yeah. Like, for a while, they were the biggest story in the league. That was
just me half kidding.
Then they were irrelevant. Now they're, 6-0-3 in their last 10. They're becoming relevant again. So, stop apologizing for that. It is what it is. They matter. No, I know, but you get insecure about that kind of thing. You do. When the chat gets on you for that, you put your tail between your legs. So,
I care about the chat's feelings. The chat's my family.
So you don't need to apologize, Johnny. It's okay. So as always, great week. We appreciate you all. I guess we won't be back tomorrow. We'll be back here Monday morning, 9 a.m. Have a good weekend, everybody.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Saravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.